If any of you wondered what a game made with a pre-release version of Unity might look like, wonder no more. A game that kickstarted a fledgling game engine, Gooball was envisioned to be the first of many games from its developers, which would all be just as lucrative as licensing the tools behind it. The game didn't have the level of success that they hoped, with Unity itself becoming the sole focus soon after release. It attracted a modest community of both new and existing Mac game devs that was bolstered further down the line with the ability to export Windows and web builds. By the time Apple started to allow third-party apps onto the iPhone, Unity was a mature product that was able to ride the iOS wave into becoming one of the leading multi-format game engines for small and independent studios. Despite their best efforts to self-destruct a couple of years ago with the runtime fee debacle. As interesting as the complete Unity story is, I'm not here to explore that. Welcome then to yesteryear's Mac Games, where the subject of interest is the game that effectively gave us Unity. Gooball is a surprisingly underexplored title from March 2005, exclusive to the Macintosh and published by Ambrosia Software as shareware in the twilight years of that distribution method. I've enjoyed reading up on the game, the engine, and the people, so we'll start by exploring the background a little bit before diving into Gooball itself, because while a failure it was, I don't think it deserved to be. I've had a lot of fun playing through the game for footage, and it's about time it got a bit better known. The story starts with three blokes in Copenhagen: David Hegelson, Nicholas Francis, and Joachim Ante. Here's a photo of them, and here's a drawing. Francis and Ante met while working on separate game projects on an OpenGL forum in 2002, while Helgeson had known Francis since high school and joined full-time slightly later. Collaboration on a simple-to-use engine started in 2003, while what we now know today as Unity Technologies was incorporated the following year as Over the Edge Entertainment. The old logo and company name is present as a splash screen in the first two versions of Gooball. The original focus was to make games for Macintosh computers, as they were all Apple fanboys and there seemed plenty of room to do so as the platform was short of compelling medium-sized games. The decision to make Unity licensable happened partway through Gooball's development, having initially been envisaged as an in-house engine. This means that as well as being the first of Over the Edge's games, Gooball would serve to kickstart interest in the toolset. Side note, despite being the first commercial release using the engine, it wasn't the first playable thing that it ever ran, as there will have been all sorts of prototypes and proof of concepts worked on during development. Small games I've seen referenced in an interview with Francis on iDev Games include a third-person driving and shooting game, a hoverbike racer, a helicopter prototype, and a simple 2D side-scroller. In addition to this, on the Unity forums, Francis also mentioned a, and I quote, Top Gun-like manga-ish submarine flight sim, which sounds insane, as well as a top-down driving game. These were both scrapped before work was started on Gooball. Goodness knows if any of this stuff still exists anywhere. After marketing a primitive-looking build themselves, with resources including this trailer, the trio eventually got Mac shareware juggernaut Ambrosia Software on board to publish the completed title. Anecdotes from the founders and various interviews suggest that revenue from Gooball kept the lights on while they were prepping Unity for release, but while the shareware demo enjoyed high downloads from Ambrosia's website, sales, or rather registrations, it was technically shareware, were never high enough to warrant trying again with more fully in-house games, although one future title does fall into a grey area. Over the Edge Entertainment, and Francis especially, were heavily involved in a 2007 title from Serious Games called Global Conflicts: Palestine. Gooball then wasn't by any means a complete disaster, but it certainly put an end to their desire to be a game studio as well as an engine developer. I can gauge from his old posts on the Unity forum that Helgeson in particular was very fond of the game they had made, while in later interviews, Ante had suggested that its success had been hampered by being too difficult to play. This might have been a factor in why there were low conversions from the high downloads of the demo, but it can't have been the only reason. The existence of several other ball-rolling platformer games on the Mac won't have helped, and at around the same time, Ambrosia were also marketing Introversion's Darwinia, with the two appearing side by side in a few locations. Mac Format gave that a better score. I do feel though that the disappointing sales were predominantly down to it being the wrong platform at the wrong time. The golden age of Macintosh shareware had ended some time ago, and the dawn of indie games on Steam was still some way off. Apple's sometimes on, sometimes off relationship with games was very much off at that time, as the company pivoted the platform towards lifestyle applications that all began with I. It's not a ridiculous notion then to say that if someone had made this game like for like in Unity 4 or 5 years later and had run off a build for Windows at the same time, that it could have been a modest hit, as everyone's hardware would be playing it on almost top graphical settings on larger screens, which would have looked plenty good enough for an indie in 2010. As mentioned earlier, Gooball 1.0 and 1.1 ran on a pre-release of Unity. Based on experience and feedback from the game, the engine was then ripped to pieces and completely rebuilt for its own 1.0 release, with one of the core documented changes being the replacement of the physics engine ODE, which Francis had described as utter crap, with PhysX. With no major customers maintaining games at this point, this was the last time that they would be able to break everything and destroy backwards compatibility. So while the step forward in technology was important and vast, it did mean that Gooball was, for a time, left behind on an old build until someone could get round to porting it over to the new version, and that wasn't a priority. This did, however, eventually happen in 2007, with the former intern, now long-term senior member of Unity staff, Jonas Echterhoff, rebuilding the game in Unity 1.6, enabling a universal build, which would now run natively on Intel Macs, alongside the preceding PowerPC-based ones. Echterhoff might be a familiar name to those versed in old Mac games, as before this he had made the popular shareware game Burnin' Rubber and its sequel Reckless Driving'. He then spent several years writing a 3D racing game called Redline, which was also published by Ambrosia. Go back far enough in the Unity forums and you'll find Helgeson teasing him for developing the whole thing himself and not using Unity. Unity's initial announcement took place at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference in 2005, and was firmly locked into the Mac ecosystem until the release of version 3 in 2009, which brought the Unity dev engine to Windows, although it was capable of outputting game builds for that and web browsers from 2006. Within these Mac-centric interim years, a few other commercial games did start to emerge on the platform. Prominent Mac studio Freeverse were an early adopter, but things were fairly quiet as the toolset and user base slowly matured, with subsequent releases adding more features and supporting more platforms. Gooball gradually became a footnote against the immense success that Unity would enjoy, so it's now time to explore the game that introduced everyone to this toolset. Gooball, the game that brought us Unity. Anecdotally, the idea to make a game like Gooball came about after a, quote, monster Super Monkey Ball session. The similarities are stark, from the environment tilting around to the thing in a ball. Early versions of the game purportedly had all sorts of animals in here before Over the Edge settled upon what they had named the Goober, which if nothing else is certainly unique. The game's concept of rolling something to a target is far from unheard of, with a few others playable on early OS X, including Marble Blast Gold, which landed a couple of years earlier and ran on the perhaps comparable at the time Torque engine. Other examples include Snowball Run from 2003 and Neverball, which had been around a bit longer but got OS X support in that same year. I think all of these games could probably trace their heritage as far back as 1984 with Atari's Marble Madness. Come release day, Gooball was downloadable from Ambrosia's website and made it onto magazine cover discs over the following months. Minimum specs were System 10.2, a G3 processor, and some form of dedicated graphics. Reviews were generally quite positive, with Mac Format describing the level design as exquisite, but criticising the replay value. Inside Mac Games highlighted Unity's lighting and shader effects, which made the game so graphically impressive for its time, while Macworld noted that the top-notch graphics and speedy performance were an either-or. To crank the visuals up to max and maintain a good frame rate on a resolution like 1680 by 1050, a high-end tower with a good graphics card is needed. Most of the install base would have had something older and or cheaper, and been more than happy playing an 800 by 600. A lot of the game's development was done on a 550 MHz tiebook, which probably represents the average Mac in terms of power in the hands of a consumer back then. It has to be said that the visuals are, overall, superb for a 2005 indie, and playing this at a high resolution at the highest graphics settings makes it easy to forget that this is an old game. Artistic visuals were predominantly handled by Kim Hansen, with the game comprising 6 thematically distinct worlds. This solid foundation is taken to the next level by the advanced shaders and other effects that Unity was capable of. Sadly, not all of these effects are fully compatible with my G5, resulting in some of these worlds being rendered improperly. Underwater in particular has turned out very dark. I can't see a thing here. I had to turn the effects down in order to get through this set of levels. Glancing through the other ball-rolling platformers for Mac, as well as a bit of Super Monkey Ball, helped me see just how much more interesting the effects and terrain in Gooball all are. although the latter also highlights one shortcoming in that perhaps more could have been done with the skyboxes. The sound effects are competent, although I think implementation of stereo was a bit wonky. A lot of the time I got sound out of one speaker that I really felt should have come out of both. Music-wise, the soundtrack fits all the worlds, although there are a couple of them that I wasn't all that fond of, the circus one in particular. Good enough then, but no catchy bops that one might idly hum. I found the initial release of Gooball to be an absolute bugger to get running. I say initial release as I tried the later Unity 1.6 build that can run on Intel Macs to find that it handled like something else entirely. The goober flew around far too fast for me to exert enough control upon it, and in my view made the game much harder. Now, I don't think they released a broken update. This is more likely a result of me playing the same game immediately after the earlier version that contained very different physics, courtesy of the completely different physics engine. Newcomers, or those that hadn't played it in a while, wouldn't need to adapt existing muscle memory. Anyway, I digress. The main issue I had with the pre-release Unity build held me up for months, as at first I couldn't get past the stage "Go into the light." As depicted here, the screen got darker and the stage ran at a snail's pace. I eventually theorised that the demo user registration code that was originally available might have been to blame. I'm guessing this might be an anti-piracy measure that was imposed to deal with dodgy serials, as after making a new one with Ambrosia's in-house keygen, which was released a few years ago, it seems to have been resolved. This new code can be found alongside a download of Gooball on the main Mac Game Archive sites. The controls take a bit of getting used to, and could be considered a tad suboptimal, with no direct control over the camera. Instead, it follows the ball around, turning some of the platforming into leaps of faith. Now, this is the same way that Monkey Ball handled the camera, but it was much better suited to its featureless, often high-speed stages. Less so with Gooball, with precision platforming sections featuring vertical surfaces. I can't help but feel that the best thing they could have done with the camera would have been to have the mouse control it directly. This is how it's done in Marble Blast, and it works brilliantly. The other drawback that playing with a keyboard has over Monkey Ball is that players cannot move slowly with a slight tilt to the analog banana. Let's blame Apple for that. Where was that accessory? Honestly, wasting time with portable music players. That'll never catch on. Mid-noughties Mac users needed an analog banana. There are two more buttons in play, one for jumping and one for stickiness. Perhaps mouse look wasn't implemented because Mac mice only had one button back then. There's plenty of space for up to 4 on an analog banana. Okay, I'll drop that. Mastering the use of both of these enables jumping from interesting angles, if one can get the camera to comply, while the sticky function helps cling to precarious surfaces and applies the brakes when travelling at speed. Stickiness doesn't just work on the floor. I managed to attach the goober to this fish, which was useful, and this cherub cutout, which wasn't. One interesting tidbit of information I found on Ambrosia's old forum is that the sticky functions weren't always infinite, with the pre-release builds that hit playtesters experimenting with the number of times it could be activated per stage. There was a smattering of story present in Gooball's marketing blurb, which might have been Ambrosia's doing rather than over the edge, as it doesn't really feature in the game itself. Unity's 10th anniversary comic was, however, able to sum it up in a single speech bubble. The goober is a wee alien that crashed its ship on Earth and was subsequently found by the CIA, who then stuck it in a ball and effectively played GLaDOS by sending it through test runs to measure its intelligence. This is entirely inconsequential to gameplay and doesn't get resolved at the end. The game's main mode is Adventure, which takes the player through 10 stages in each of the 5 worlds. As the player progresses through the game, they'll unlock Travel Mode, where the goober can stick to the underside of objects, thus opening up new, faster ways to play through the stages. Upon reaching the final set of stages in Adventure, Hardcore Mode unlocks, which I took a look at here and came straight back out of. You might be able to tell from the jerky movements here that the sensitivity of the controls in this mode has been raised significantly. The general objective in each stage is to get to the target, with the occasional requirements of landing on switches in the underwater stages or collecting little aliens in Area 51 to activate it. This feature was used somewhat sparingly, but did assist each area in playing a bit different from each other. The outer space stages, for instance, were typically a speedy race against the clock, while the circus stages were much more generous with time, and slower to play through with lots of fiddly bits. Overall level design seems quite good, although some of the more interesting ideas can be hampered by other limitations of the game. Dropping down the platforms in this stage is ruined by the camera, and the often very limited timer discourages playing around on the alluring but non-vital parts of the larger Montezuma levels.
Out of time.
Twirling cherubs can get in the bin. Upon impact, these things twat the goober into next week, and I just completely lacked the speed, control, and awareness, compliments of the camera, to avoid them consistently. Some stages need to be rolled through in a specific way, such as this one, which I struggled with for ages. I eventually figured out I had to plonk the goober at the top of each arc with stickiness activated, and then simply let go. The drop angles the camera in the correct direction, so speed could be correctly applied on the way up the other side. Trying to brute force it with stickiness didn't work. The camera would ping to and fro like a game of tennis, and take the controls with it. An unexpected 90-degree pan turns forward into left, which will at best cause an additional swish of the camera, and at worst will fling the goober off into the abyss. The faster, more spaced out levels, however, are all good fun, sometimes enticing the player into taking a harder route with a diamond or two. 10 diamonds grant an extra life, and also bumps up the end of level score. If a player loses all their lives on a stage and game overs, the game will then offer to drop them into a consequence-free practice mode, where they may better get to grips with the level's sticking point before re-attempting the block of 5 again back in adventure mode. Good feature. I feel then that to fully enjoy Gooball, familiarity with the stages is key. Not knowing what's going on, guessing, and failing is frustrating, but after figuring stages out and getting the knack of dispatching them quickly and/or stylishly, there's a lot of fun to be had. Doing things in a specific way is also sometimes rewarded. Trying to beat best level scores, having figured out the optimal routes, is exciting, especially if there's someone to compete with. It is then a little unfortunate that there isn't a screen to display the best stage times and scores, considering that it does store a name next to them all. Overall, playing through Gooball has at times been frustrating. Getting it running how I wanted it was a massive faff, and its relative obscurity made reading up on it more of a scavenger hunt. Nevertheless, I've really enjoyed my time with the game, and I've become very fond of it. While I would have liked to maybe see more stages alongside those it came with, playing through the entirety of the game did take a fair few sessions, and that was only in adventure mode. This is something that I, and many others doing retrospectives, have said a few times, but I feel that those that had purchased a full copy of Gooball 20 years ago and played it frequently over a much longer time period than I have as a reviewer will have pushed through the rough edges and dodgy camera and really enjoyed what the game had to offer. Nowadays, everyone has a Steam backlog or game subscription service with a huge choice of things to play, leading to even mild imperfections being a potential death sentence for a game. Is Gooball worth resurrecting, or will it forever remain a hidden curio, as a mere mention within the history of Unity? Well, in all probability, it's going to be that. Gooball was the reason that Unity didn't continue to make games, and, oh hang on, they made one last year. A small title for the Switch 2 to help them tune the tools to the new platform and improve customer support. In many ways then, it serves a very similar purpose to what Gooball did. On the other hand, it might not take too much work to get the version running on Unity 1.6, running fully on modern systems. Someone's actually had a crack at it. I found an unexplained, unregistered copy on archive.org that someone had fiddled with to run on Windows. This is it here. Some of the graphical effects aren't working, but it's running smooth enough on my contemporary tower under Windows. As of time of recording though, the best way to play the full game is on an old Mac. Something with a G4 or G5 in it, and a decent graphics chip if one desires a higher resolution. The rewrite for Unity 1.6 will work on Intel Macs up to a point, possibly the 32-bit app cutoff, while emulation might also be an option, but don't bank on that. Macintosh emulation has always been meh. To wrap this up then, the legacy of this now 21-year-old game cannot be understated. The work that went into it, and the toolset and community that in part came out of it, has and continues to be one of the cornerstones of game development. While the company has grown into something completely unlike how over-the-edge entertainment started, I've seen the organisation referred to as an engine and in-app advertising company, so make of that what you will. The toolset will, over the years, have been responsible for many similar origin stories of game studios based all over the world. And all that is thanks, in part, to this little sentient bogey encased in a sticky sphere. And we'll leave it there. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it around. Do pop your thoughts in the comments, and for more content on Mac games from years gone by spanning multiple decades, Gooball might actually be the newest thing I've covered. Check out the rest of my channel. More content is always in the works, albeit sporadic, so do subscribe to ensure you don't miss it. Thanks for watching then, and see you next time.